this fusion, singing about Jesus and salvation and venereal diseases and your sex life and all of that sort of stuff.
This is Rock That Doesn't Roll, the story of Christian music. I'm Andrew Gill, a music journalist who grew up listening to Christian rock.
And I'm Leah Payne, author of God Gave Rock and Roll to You, a history of contemporary Christian music.
Today on the show, digging back into the archives in this podcast's prehistory.
I love it.
Yeah, so people often ask, what does the name of your podcast mean? Where did it come from? Rock That Doesn't Roll, what is that? And, you know, a subset of our audience is like, it's a Larry Norman song, of course.
Right.
You know, we're on our third season. We still haven't done an episode about Larry Norman. So,
yeah.
And he did provide us the name of our podcast. So I think it's about time that we do an episode. And actually, it's going to be a two-part episode. So this is an interview I did with Gregory Alan Thornbury before I ever met you, Leah. It was
amazing.
Yeah, he was Larry Norman's biographer. He's the author of the book called Why Should the Devil Have All the Good Music? It's a definitive biography of Larry Norman.
Yes.
Yeah. He had, like, the family gave him all kinds of archival materials. He has, like, Larry's journals, and he's, like...
Right.
He's gone about as deep as you could go with Larry. And it's a very good book. So I spoke with him when I was just thinking about this idea of maybe making a podcast about Christian rock.
I'm so excited that you did because, I mean, I can't think of a better place or scholar to start with than him. So I'm excited to listen to the interview.
Yeah, right. I know you've never heard it. And actually, I went back to start editing it, and I was like, oh my God, this thing is like very long. It's like quite long. So it is going to be 2 episodes. But one of the things he said at the end, I was asking him for tips on who else I should interview as I was like putting this thing together. And he's like, do you know someone named Leah Payne? You should talk to Leah Payne.
What? That's awesome. Thank you, Dr. Thornbury. That makes me so happy. Yay.
So, yeah,
bringing people together.
Yeah, this was April of 2022 when I talked with Gregory. And we talk about Larry's early life, a lot about his views on race and how it showed up in his music, his first band, People, and the period of time when he was street preaching, and then how he balanced that with being a staff writer at Capitol Records.
Wow.
And then this is a part that you, I think, will you know a lot about, I'm sure, Leah. But we do have a bit about his marriage in there.
Okay.
His wife was quite a character.
Yeah. Oh wow, I'm looking forward to listening.
Yeah. So here's my interview from more than 3 years ago with Gregory Alan Thornbury about Larry Norman.
Great.
My name is Gregory Alan Thornbury, Thornbury, as in I bury the hatchet. And I am many things. I am an erstwhile theologian. I guess I would describe myself that way. And a writer, interrogator of my former life in evangelical Christianity, and the biographer of Larry Norman. And my next book is going to be a spiritual biography of Karl Marx. And that's not a joke. It's not going to be a pamphlet either. In terms of Larry Norman, I think it's fair to say that the phenomenon that we call the contemporary Christian music industry arguably might not have existed without Larry Norman. He was certainly name-checked all throughout the 1970s up until currently as the father of Christian rock. And he was unique in the sense that he was an actual commodity in the rock and roll music industry, unlike almost all of his successors up until maybe just fairly recently, where you have some of the legatees of evangelicalism have a breakthrough without going through the Christian market first, like Haley Williams from Paramore and so forth. But Larry was really able to launch something that was very controversial at the time, which was to talk about religion in rock and roll music, and not just religion, but name check Jesus, and also to discuss, worldview and morality and how one should live their life. That had never really been tried before, even within the gospel hymnody tradition of the, American Protestant church. Larry actually was picking up on the Black gospel tradition. He grew up in a Christian home, and like a lot of other kids, his mom and dad thought that rock and roll was of the devil.
He was born in Texas, right?
He was born in Corpus Christi, Texas.
Yeah.
Yes. But they fairly quickly moved to the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, all the way until he sort of got his start in the music industry. And then eventually he moved to Hollywood and really lived in Hollywood when he was sort of at the zenith of his notoriety and fame. But he would press a radio up against his ear in his bedroom at the lowest possible volume because he was not supposed to be listening to the radio. And he had a crush on his one of his babysitters when he was a little kid. And he heard Elvis for the first time. And it sort of, shot through him. And then in 1964, like every other kid on the planet, the Beatles, were a revelation to him. But while that was happening, a lot of people talk about the advent of rock and roll. What Larry studied even as a little kid, and actually was a part of his family tradition, was this awareness of the Jim Crow South and of the white supremacy of the South. That was, something that his father was aware of. And his father, even though he was an English teacher in high schools, he went to Bible college and wrote papers in support of Martin Luther King, Jr., which was very controversial at the time. So I think Larry understood that what Elvis did was appropriate a genre of music that is fundamental to not only rock and roll, but American culture in general and other genres like jazz. And he's like, why aren't we allowed to talk about Jesus in that format? So just one other thing, and then, we'll see where we go from here. But he formed a band with a couple of other members, the Levin brothers. It was called People! Exclamation point.
I should tell you just how I feel, and I keep trying, but something holds me back when I try to tell you I love
The Levin brothers were really they sort of founded the band, but when Larry joined it, he was incredibly prolific and was writing some very, complicated and elegant songs, and had been writing songs since he was, a little kid.
In your book, you published some of the lyrics he had written for a song that was like very anti-racist. It was like, taking some of that anti-Jim Crow awareness, and getting it into his art in a way that's like, I don't really see in a lot of his adult output. It's kind of strange to to see that as a child, but at some point that sort of was cut to the edges, or the outer, is cut out of his like adult output, sort of.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the most famous example of the anti-racism would be the Great American Novel, where he says, he's talking to white Christians in the South. The sheet you wear upon your face is the sheet your children sleep on.
You kill a black man at midnight just for talking to your daughter. Then you make his wife your mistress, and you leave her without water. And the sheet you wear up on your face is the sheet your children sleep on. And at every meal you say a prayer you don't believe, but still you keep on.
Okay, so it is in there some. Yeah, it's just not this.
Yeah,
it's not
so
the core part of his identity, I guess.
Yeah. The other thing too was that, I mean, he was a big Eldridge Cleaver fan and was championing, Eldridge Cleaver's conversion to Christianity. And
wait, who is that? I don't know that.
He was Eldridge Cleaver was, was one of the principal leaders of the Black Panther movement.
Oh, right. Okay. He was in the Bay Area, so that's where the Panthers were very active, right?
Yes, absolutely. And when, Eldridge Cleaver fled the country, when he was being pursued by the FBI, and, purportedly Eldridge Cleaver had some sort of vision of Jesus. And so Larry wrote this song Eldridge Cleaver wrote this famous book about the Black experience in America while he was in prison, called Soul on Ice. Right. And then he wrote a follow-up book called Soul on Fire. And so Larry wrote a song talking about Eldridge Cleaver's Black experience in America for the Christian, music market, and the record company hated it.
Eldridge says he's different now, but a lot of people don't agree. They say he's only trying to free himself. I guess in time we all shall see. But I do believe his message. He ain't no liar when he says that Jesus can set your soul on fire.
So he did write things, but some of them didn't see the light of day in terms of like a distribution perspective. But
yeah, that's interesting. That's something I want to get into maybe a little later, just about how the whole industry sprung up around him, and then in a way just like exerted so much control over people. So
oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, that's an important piece, and I do want to come back to that. But after People.
And so, People, they did some like musical theater almost stuff, right? Like performance art in their...
They were certainly amongst the very earliest people doing concept records. Mm-hmm. So the whole one side of their record was a concept album that Larry wrote with the drummer in the band, Denny Fredkin. But I think Larry was even thinking more theatrically earlier than that. They would, dress up in, performance gear, the, dragons, and, Larry would use the microphone stand as a sword. And they were on tour with The Who in 1968 while People were doing this on stage. And, chronologically,
not too long until Tommy comes out.
Tommy is afterwards. So, you don't want to commit the fallacy of post hoc ergo propter hoc, which is after which therefore because of which. But yes, they were on tour with major acts like Janis Joplin and The Who, and they played with Santana, and I mean a whole bunch of people. Right. And Larry left the band for a number of reasons, one of which is the other guys hated him.
and became Scientologists too, right? Some of them became.
That was a big part of it too. He got audited and he got labeled a suppressive person. And then he was performing, and stage opened up while they were performing, and he fell through the stage, and the two sections of the stage, crushed his finger when he was, down in the bowels of the thing, and they pulled it back. And when he, got up, that, his finger was broken and there was blood squirting everywhere, sort of like kind of proto Ozzy Osbourne kind of thing, but actual blood instead of fake blood capsules.
Right.
And he took that as like a sign from the Holy Spirit that he should be doing something more serious with his music than, doing silly love songs.
Rock that doesn't roll.
This show is supported by Odoo. When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
And so in 1969, he's signed to Capitol Records, and he had been a staff writer for Capitol Records, and he makes a record called Upon This Rock on Capitol Records, which was a disaster commercially from Capitol's point of view because there was no market for it.
Yeah.
Christian psychedelic was not a genre, but it did get picked up by Benson Records, and that sparked this thing called the Jesus movement because, and it sold, hundreds of thousands of copies. There's no way to really know, but it became ubiquitous. And songs like I Wish We'd All Been Ready and Sweet Song of Salvation, kids sung those at Young Life groups and then it became huge in the UK. And
this is
all of a sudden,
1969, right?
This is 1969. And so by 1971, when the Jesus movement is now like a international phenomenon, Larry is sort of the Pied Piper of it. And it's not like he was completely alone. There were other bands and groups trying to do the same thing, but he was sort of the forerunner. And then I think a lot of people began to realize, oh, wow, I could have a career singing Jesus music.
Yeah.
And it's sort of an alternative path to becoming a rock star. So you have a humongous built-in audience of all these kids whose parents are telling them you can't listen to that, devil honoring, secular rock and roll music.
This is like a key moment. So you said that Capitol thought it was a flop, but Benson licensed it and sold tons and tons of copies. So this is like the first proof case of the commercial appeal of this type of music. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, so Larry had several secular, quote unquote, secular record deals. The first one was with Capitol, and he had the People record. And then he was a staff writer for Capitol, and then Upon This Rock. And then he got signed to MGM Verve, and did
alongside
two
the Velvet
records.
Underground,
Yes. And two very, very incredibly, I think they're aesthetic achievements. Only Visiting This Planet and So Long Ago, The Garden. And then after MGM Verve, he signed a contract with ABC. And then that got partnered with a distribution deal with Word Records in Dallas, Texas.
A Christian label.
And a Christian label. So finally there was this, Larry Norman records would be sold at Sam Goody and Tower Records, but you could also find them in this new phenomenon in American culture called Bible bookstores.
Mm-hmm.
It was things like Explo 72, where in addition to having, this forerunner like Larry Norman playing there, you had Chris Christopherson and Johnny Cash and, Marilyn McCoo, I think was also maybe on mistaken about that. But there were real viable major stars, standing alongside Billy Graham. And there's over 100,000 kids at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. And I think it's at that point that, whenever there's money to be made, people thought, oh, well, this isn't commercial. And then they start saying, oh my goodness, this is as big as any rock festival that's happening in the country. And when Explo 72 gets, in Life magazine, and in Time magazine, it starts dawning on people, at places like Word Records and Maranatha Music, which came out of the Calvary Chapel movement, that they had just been doing sort of like, Southern gospel records and sort of very, very tame, adult contemporary Christian music at best. And then now there's a market for Christian rock. And the thing that Larry brought to the Matrix there was that when you listen to those first 3 solo records he did, even though he didn't like the way Upon This Rock sounded, the Wrecking Crew played on Upon This Rock.
Hal Blaine playing drums.
Hal Blaine is on drums,
It sounds, I listened to it last night. It sounds like a Harry Nilsson record or something,
It's totally, it's very reminiscent of Nilsson.
Yeah.
And then you also have studio pros at Air Studios, which is George Martin's studio in London for Planet and So Long Ago The Garden. And they sounded like A+ first-rate rock and roll records in their own right. And so up until that point, if Word Records was going to do an album, they would have a budget of like $5,000.
Right.
And it was
and they'd have the gospel group in the studio with 1 or 2 microphones and
correct
in a day, probably,
Yes, exactly. And what I think Larry showed, and then he started his own record label that would be distributed through ABC Word, was that you could, really put a good amount of money, like $20,000, $30,000 into making a record, so it would sound as good as anything else that was on the radio. That was the real turning point. And then because the distribution in places like Bible bookstores, all of a sudden you could find some listenable contemporary rock type music. Most of it was terrible, but that's another conversation.
Yeah. I mean, and also the built-in audience part, I think it's brilliant. And also, I mean, it only dawned on me recently that these pastors that would have kids destroy all their secular music, what are they going to buy to replace that,
Well, yeah, and it was always that was the genius of it, because there was a magazine that got started by an editor / publisher named John Still called CCM Magazine. And when they started it, they came to Larry and they said, "Hey, we're going to have like a Christian Rolling Stone." And he said, "I think that's the worst idea that I've ever heard."
Yeah.
Because what is it, like a Jesus popularity contest, and who's more popular with Jesus right now? He's like, nobody who would want to listen. There is nobody that you would actually want to reach. The mindset I think that Larry had was that you ought to at least give somebody the option of knowing that Jesus existed and that he might be an alternative to whatever sort of worldview or lifestyle you were a part of. So the song that he wrote for Janis Joplin, why don't you look into Jesus, is that thing like, hey, there's a different, maybe this is better for you, think about it.
Yeah.
But I think he thought that there was a chance, maybe a ghost of a chance, that you would have, the average kid would pick this up and listen to it and take it in, just like folk music, in the, early 60s had political content of it and was challenging people to think differently about the socio-political landscape and economic landscape in the United States. So I think that was his goal. But then when the Christian music industry started, they were definitely preaching to the choir. And it, was ghettoized almost from the get-go.
Yeah. And I'm curious about his sort of theology and like because there's so much proselytizing like inherent in his approach. Talk a little bit about this period right before Upon This Rock came out, where he was writing these Broadway musicals and that didn't wind up getting produced. He was almost cast in Hair, right? And so he had this like Broadway career he was sort of pursuing. And then he was on staff writing for Capitol, right? And then he'd go walk around LA at night just to try to evangelize people, right? To tell them. So I guess I want the audience for this, I want them to understand what that means and like the thought process behind that and kind of like get inside of what he's thinking when he's doing this. Because I think today, like the idea of walking, like if you were to walk out of your office in New York City and just walk around looking for people to say, hey, you want to pray to accept Jesus into your heart? It's just so baffling to people, I think. I don't know. It's just a bizarre concept.
Well, it is a bizarre concept. And I think it shows in stark relief how much American culture has changed, because I don't think that the average person today contemplates changing their mind for any reason about anything. People become very locked in. Maybe they go through a sea change in college, but it's not like that they change their mind or think that they might have been wrong entirely about their life or their value system or their spirituality. But in the 60s and the early 70s, that was definitely the case. There were various different kinds of credulities towards cults and, various different kinds of spiritual practices and spiritual practices through narcotics. And there's a fascinating documentary on Father Yod, who, ran this health food restaurant that's in Woody Allen's Annie Hall, for example, that there was this whole cult that was, kind of like religious sex cult that was, and this is the rise of the time of people like, Tony Alamo, who was parallel right side by side with contemporary culture. He's making, fashion wear for Dolly Parton and Michael Jackson and all these people. And he's running a cult at the same time. And I think that for Larry, I think he saw his ability as a songwriter, because he was getting a lot of plaudits and laurels from people in the music industry that knew that he had the goods. I mean, they actually, the Alice in Wonderland musical that he was writing for Broadway, it didn't actually get staged on Broadway, but they did. It was written and it was produced with a cast in Capitol's recording studio, and I have it. So on the one hand, when you listen to that, it is kind of a critique of the hippie movement in a way, but it's also in places very crass and politically incorrect and offensive. And Larry's writing that. So in the one side of his mouth, he's sort of doing things that he thinks will be entirely commercial, and not even thinking about how does this represent me as a follower of Christ. At the same time, he was going out onto the Hollywood and Vine and standing on the corner and preaching to get people to change their minds about, there's something missing in your life that you need to make your life better. It is a conversion mindset. And it's something that's hard for contemporary people to understand because people don't think that way anymore.
Yeah. So around this time, he had been out proselytizing just on his own, preaching on the street corner of Hollywood and Vine without a guitar, and he had for a while locked his guitar in a closet because he thought that God didn't want him to be, it was a temptation, maybe because he was doing these more commercial things that he thought didn't reflect his values.
Some very Freudian stuff going on there.
Yeah. And then
for sure.
Describe his experiment where he was like, how he wrote two of his best known songs, right? This like dream experiment, right?
Yeah. Well, he was like, I'm going to give up my music career altogether, and I'm going to become a preacher and an evangelist. And that's what I'm going to do. And then, in his sleep, he's hearing this music and he wakes up and it's Sweet, Sweet Song of Salvation, which is an earworm kind of tune. And he's realizing that not only is there the tune, but there's actually words to it. And so he's like trying to remember it from the dream. And then it dawns on him, if it's in a dream, maybe it's from God. Because when you read in the Bible, God is constantly speaking to, his prophets and, his disciples and apostles in dreams. And so it seems like now maybe God has given him permission to, it's like, God gave me this song, so who am I to say I shouldn't be doing it? So he goes and gets his guitar out of the closet and turns on his tape recorder, and that's where this fusion of, somebody who had a completely secular rock career up until that point starts, singing about Jesus and salvation and, eventually venereal diseases and, your sex life and all of that sort of stuff in this weird, bizarre hybrid of rock and roll with, this sort of swaggery kind of like, I know better than you do. about some things, like a guru.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Gonorrhea on Valentine's Day, and you're still looking for the perfect play. You think rock and roll will set you free, honey? You'll be dead before you're 33, shooting junk till you're half insane, a broken needle in your purple vein.
You find these sort of culty elements in what he was doing. Originally, he had started because of that accident with the stage and his finger. When he would play music, his finger would hurt for a long time after that. Even after it's healed, it would burn and hurt. So he started raising his index finger up after songs. And the audio, I think, sort of originally he was just doing it to let the blood rush down out of his finger. But then he realized people started imitating him, and he was like, "Oh, they're taking this as a religious symbol,
like an alternative
pointing
to the
to
peace
heaven,
sign." Yeah,
an alternative to the peace sign instead of the two, it's the one, and it becomes the one-way symbol, and he trademarks it.
Yeah.
He trademarks the finger pointed upward and so at his concerts he would finish a song, and the rap was that Jesus music concerts, instead of being loud, they were quiet, because instead of clapping, because he didn't like people clapping, he didn't want people to applaud. He wanted them to think about what he was saying. So after he would finish a song, instead of people like clapping, they'd every kid in the audience raised their index finger to the sky, one way. There's only one way to heaven.
Yes.
It's Jesus. He's the one way. And you see thousands of kids doing this, and it's kind of a little bit spooky. Like this is now an army. Of hippies that have some kind of weird moral authority.
Yeah,
or
totally.
perceive that they do.
It's interesting because my parents were like that age. They graduated high school in like 69 and 70. And we're very much like church going good kids. Like my dad calls himself a wannabe hippie, like a pseudo hippie. And do you have a sense of like, was he actually reaching hippies, or was it all these good kids who were wanting to listen to cooler music than their parents would let them?
So that's the funny thing about this, is that the first person to throw the Jesus movement under the bus was Larry Norman, because he said, my original idea was to try to reach people, but all these kids that were coming to these concerts, like Explo 72, were just good Christian kids that came to nice Christian concerts, and they were just trying to be nicer. And he said there actually was no Jesus movement. It was a fool's errand. And he abandons the notion of doing Jesus rock. So for a while, so long ago, the Garden is bereft of any evangelistic references whatsoever. It doesn't talk about Jesus. It's not preachy. The MGM Verve was like, you need to release a record that is just a rock and roll record, and you're never going to get covered by Rolling Stone if you're doing this kind of thing. And so he markets his publicist, and people are marketing him as sort of like Dylan-esque sort of Jackson Brown sort of prophet type figure. And in that famous concert at the Royal Albert Hall, he said, I'm not going to sing Jesus music anymore because I don't want it to be said that I made money off of Jesus. I don't want to do that. Which was a apocalyptic disaster for his career, because so long ago, The Garden, the album cover gets banned in these Bible bookstores because he's nude on down to his nether regions,
right,
on the cover. And the only thing that is, there's a lion sitting in, African tall grass that's superimposed over his body. But I mean, people are like, oh, that's when he becomes really an outlaw. He goes from being the Pied Piper of the Jesus movement to being this, public enemy number one. He's left the faith. He's not talking about Jesus anymore. He's a drug addict, and at that point, Larry really becomes the bad boy of Christian rock, and he gets lots of very concerned letters from people that are now tied to this Christian music industry, like, we don't think you're being a very good witness. So it's ironic that just 2 years before, he would have been the sine qua non of the of that preachiness, and then within just a little bit, he's become this wild child outlaw that is leading kids astray. And it's interesting in John Darnielle's book Wolf and White Van.
Mm-hmm.
That book is a Larry Norman reference, because in that there's a kid that goes to a youth group, and the youth pastor is saying, even this Christian rock is of the devil too. And they play a Larry Norman record backwards, the song 666. And in the backward masking, you hear Wolf and White Van. And so Larry Norman is a wolf in sheep's clothing. He's really leading you astray.
He walked up to the temple with gold in his hand, and he bought off the priests and propositioned the land. And the world was his harlot and laid in the sand, while the band played 666.
Rock that doesn't roll.
Hey, Rock That Doesn't Roll listeners. We just want to give you an update on our Patreon support. We have been very heartened to see new people signing up almost every week to help bring this podcast to you. And we could not appreciate it more.
Yeah. So for those of you who may or may not know, this is a work of love. This is a project that comes from the heart. And so we rely on funds from dedicated listeners like you all. Thank you so much to the people who've already decided to give. It's actually, I don't know, it warms my heart. I don't know how you feel about it. Andrew, you were raised Methodist. Is your heart strangely warmed by...
Yeah, just call me John Wesley over here. Yeah. No, it is the thing that, is required to make the show. We are still not really paying ourselves a fair wage, but we are offsetting some of the lost potential earning time that we put into this podcast.
Yeah.
So if you do want the show to continue existing, we do need listeners to support us. And, if that's not financially, you can tell people about us. You could share us on social media, do all other things. But we would love this to be something we can dedicate a lot of time to. But, we have to provide for our families, and we do not each have trust funds. I don't have a trust fund. You don't have a trust fund, do you, Leah?
No,
just
no,
checking. Yeah,
sad to say. Yeah.
So, we appreciate all the support.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Hey, Rock That Doesn't Roll listeners, we want to let you know about an event coming up in October called Theology Beer Camp. It's October 16th to 18th in St. Paul, Minnesota.
I'm really excited about this because it brings together a lot of my favorite things. I'm not really a beer drinker. I feel like I shouldn't say that. But what I really like to do is hang out with people and talk about theology and religion in public life with a lot of really smart people, and think about culture, because really our podcast is about religion and culture. I think in the spirit of those comparison charts, if you like Rock That Doesn't Roll, you'll love Theology Beer Camp, I think is a pretty safe thing to say.
I think there's a pretty good chance that you would. The thing that we want you guys to know is that if you register for this event, which is October 16th to 18th in St. Paul, Minnesota, use our code RTDR and you'll get $75 off your registration.
What a deal.
Again, use the code RTDR and you'll get $75 off registration at Theology Beer Camp 2025. TheologyBeerCamp2025.com is also the URL where you can go to register.
It seems inevitable. If you become a beloved star, you're gonna fail at some point. And the fact that like people kept thinking that that's not gonna happen for me. I mean, a music career is so uncontrollable, I guess, that you can't foresee things like that happening, but it's just ironic that it like continued happening and frustrating these artists like over and over again for decades after that. The same kind of cycle that Larry Norman went through.
Yes, and it also created this weird world in which there were these young artists that saw people like Larry Norman who were having commercial success. They were playing concerts with thousands of people. They had a big following. Their records sounded good, and they wanted that too. But you can't be there. There is this sort of egalitarian flattening out of all personages in evangelical Christianity, kind of, where everybody's supposed to be the servant of everybody else and nobody is supposed to be a star. And so you've got people that want to be rock stars, but that can't really go there.
Mm-hmm.
And so Larry's record label, Solid Rock Records, I think he thinks it's going to be this artist commune in which all of this very provocative, explorational Christian thinking was going to make its way to vinyl. And it just is a spectacular disaster, mostly, with one exception, which is Mark Hurd.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the only, during the, like late 70s, early 80s, he's the only one really pulling off what Larry wanted to happen, which is great songwriting, super intelligent lyrics, exploring spiritual issues, but yet not propaganda.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, and even Larry fails on that point,
right,
over and over again.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we have to talk about his wife, which is such a that's another one of those contradictory elements of his life, that where you're just like, wow, how is he writing these songs? And it's in a way like you can look at her with a feminist lens, looking back.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't know her mind, but it's almost like she was experiencing liberation that, which jibes a lot more with my current theology, than what Larry was experiencing or trying to, convert people to. And it was just a lot of trouble for him, right? Like, can you describe her and like what she was doing?
Pam Ahlquist was a flight attendant for Northwest Airlines. She was from Minneapolis, St. Paul, and she is sort of seeing this, nascent Jesus movement happening, and she decides she wants to be in LA, both to see what the Holy Spirit is up to, and also because she wants to be an actor. She wants to be, and so she winds up being a model and a sort of like never really a successful actress, but like occasionally gets roles on television shows like Chips, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, she's in this modeling world, and she starts this Christian modeling class, like how to be a supermodel for Christ, for young girls. And yet the tension is with, the fame and the notoriety that comes for that. And when do you say yes and when do you say no? So, she's posing for some pornographic magazines and is on the cover of Playgirl magazine, but she's also been on a cover girl on Billy Graham's Decision magazine too. And it's this weird, I love it because it is a great amalgamation of the tensions that are being experienced by this weird time in the 1970s that it's, most people don't remember, where the most notable evangelical in the United States was Jimmy Carter, the president of the United States. And it was like you can combine these two things that shouldn't be combined. So in some ways, Pam and Larry were perfect for each other because they were both trying to force together these two Scotty dogs that were reverse polarized. And they just kept pushing each other apart, and it created all kinds of havoc. And so, Pam's going to, invited by Hugh Hefner to go to the Playboy Mansion, is, offered, most beautiful girl in the world feature in Playboy. And in her mind, she's thinking, this is an opportunity for the Lord. And Larry's like, how can Playboy be an opportunity for the Lord? Right. But in a way, he's sort of doing the same, he's doing the same thing too.
Yeah.
And it's, I still think that tension is still very much a part of the psyche of the, average evangelical Christian today, which is, like 6th grade middle school cafeteria. I really want them to like us. Do you think they like us? What are they saying about us? Can we be popular and yet, be a witness? And it doesn't turn out well for Larry and Pam, because he sees her as self-absorbed and vain. And she thinks he's self-absorbed and vain and not paying enough attention to her. And chaos ensues.
And initially, I think when she was moving out there to live with him, she thought she would be part of his act, like they'd be Johnny and Carter or something.
Sonny and Cher.
Yeah,
I mean, she saw Larry perform on the beach, and I actually. One of the things that made this book so wonderful to do was that Larry was OCD and he kept everything. Recorded phone calls with, people surreptitiously, and the voluminous correspondence with people that, were perceived enemies of his. There were probably 400 boxes that were like time capsules that I went through. His diary, his plane tickets, his passports, his, and in there was Pam's diaries. And,
wow.
And you can see her drawing a picture of Larry playing the guitar. Like the first time she saw him, it's in her. I was like, I'm going to marry this man.
Wow.
So she sort of she sees that as sort of a path to notoriety for herself. And when they fly to the UK, she's got pot in her suitcase. And he's like, what are you doing? And she's like, well, just tell him it's tea. And he's like, I can't get busted, at O'Hare. Jesus rock star, busted for pot, and this was happening to every, George Harrison and, Paul McCartney and Mick Jagger and all these people. Cannot happen to me. And they get over to the UK, and I think she thinks that she's going to perform with him. And he's like, this is not amateur hour. I'm like a professional rock and roll musician. I've been doing this for a long time. And you're not a part of this. And that's really hard for her, because I think, again, the Christian trope is, this is a union, in Christ, and we are co-laborers in the Lord's vineyard together. And why wouldn't we sing together? And Larry is like rolling his eyes, and I was like, no, this is my career. My career is more important than this, whatever, vision of what matrimony was supposed to look like for you. So it's really kind of off to a pretty rocky start.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning. But it's so vivid and so wonderful that I do hope someday it gets made into a film, because I think it would reveal a lot of those tensions that, like I said, still exist in the Christian world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for listening. You can find Gregory Allen Thornbury on Instagram at gthornbury. And as he said, it's Bury, as in bury the hatchet. And you can find more of this conversation on our next episode covering, all kinds of stuff about Larry's record label, where he fit into evangelicalism as a whole. And we get into a little bit more of Gregory's own story. He's had quite a journey himself. You can find that next time on Rock That Doesn't Roll. And you can also find us on Substack and Instagram by searching Rock That Doesn't Roll.
And of course, you should give us a rating and review on whatever podcast app you're using to listen right now. Rock That Doesn't Roll is an independent production supported by you, our listeners, and distributed by PRX.
Our original score is by Jim Cooper of Infomercial USA.
I'm Leah Payne, and the show's producer and co-host is the one and only Andrew Gill.
Remember, rock all you want, but watch it when you start to roll. Thanks so much for listening to this entire episode all the way to the end. Give yourself a pat on the back. And if you enjoy the show this much, consider becoming a Patreon member at patreon.com/RTDR. Thanks so much.